Alright, what we're going to do today is to show you how we can set up a basic spreadsheet to do some basic calculations. You're probably already familiar with a lot of the various steps and tools for formatting spreadsheet cells because of your familiarity with a word processing program. There's a lot of overlap between the tools and the commands, so I won't go too much into those, but we do want our cells or our data to stand out. These are our values in here, and these are labels, so we do want those to stand out from each other. So we can do some basic things by, say, selecting cells. And if I want to select a range of cells that aren't next to each other, I can push the control button while I'm highlighting to select a whole bunch of cells that aren't next to each other. And I can do things like applying some basic formatting and colours. Other things I can tend to do is I can merge or join cells together by selecting a range of cells and clicking on this merge and center button, and that will join and center all the contents of the text. Other things which are quite useful to do to try and frame things up is to stick on borders for our information so it stands out. If I was to have a bit of a print preview here and take a look, you notice that all the grids or the cells have disappeared, and that's simply there to help you when you're working with the data. If you want those cells or grids to be appearing all the time, you can use the borders and tables toolbar, turn on all the borders, and when you go to print preview now, you'll notice that the information's a bit clearer to see. Other things that we can tend to want to do is when we've got labels that don't nicely fit within our cell, we can increase or decrease the heights of our rows by left clicking when it changes to this particular symbol. I can left click and drag it down and it will tell you some information about the heights of those particular rows. I can do the same thing with our columns by resizing things up. When it isn't on the symbol, if I double click, it will want to resize those to fit things in a smaller space as possible. And you can see that some of my labels are a bit different in terms of sizing, so things that I can do here is I can highlight this first row, I can right click and come down to the Format Cells option, and this brings up a number of different options for telling the program what type of data we're dealing with, whether it's text or numbers or currency, to have dollar symbols and the level of decimal places or precision that we'd like, whether we're dealing with dates or so on, and percentages. But in this case we're dealing with just regular old text, which we can say is either general or using this option text. Other options that we have within the tabs is the alignment tab, and this allows us to do things like merging or joining cells together like I showed you before, or using the wrap text option. Merging cells option. We can also do things like wrapping text, and I'm going to turn this option here on, and when we resize our columns now to be a little bit too small to fit our data, the information will nicely wrap across two lines. So that's a great option for that. We're going to use quite a bit here. When I've selected all of those columns, if I was to come over here and resize this furthest one, they're all going to resize to be the exact same size. So I'm just going to drag them down and try and make them all fit nicely. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'll go a little bit smaller, and I'll probably center the contents of my cells here as well, and I could even do that for my values also. So now we've got some text that's made to stand out a little bit more. I'm going to add a few other labels down the side here to try and teach you some of the basic formulas. So one of the most common ones that we'd use would be a total formula, which is going to add up all our common test and examination marks. We often want to find our maximum result and probably our minimum result within our range of cells, and we can do things like work out averages and medians and things like that too. So I'm going to add those on just to show you some of the basic formulas that we might like to deal with. Another one called the count, where we're going to count the number of entries within a given range, and it's at this point we're going to start working with formulas. So with formulas we're going to look at applying a formula in this situation here, and we always do that by either typing directly up into the formula bar or within our cell directly, and we start every formula with an equal sign, and this tells the program to expect to do a calculation. Now we can go about clicking on the individual cells and do them one at a time. That's one option. We could plug in the numbers. Okay. However, the problem with using numbers is that as soon as we've got a number that changes up in our top list, because these are hard-coded numbers and not actually pointing to the cells, that means our answer would be wrong once we update these. So whenever possible, we always want to use the cell references to go about adding things. So you can see that we've got the little dotted lines indicating the cell's been selected. I'm going to push the plus key on my keyboard and I can select a range of different cells. You can see they're all nicely color coding these up, and if I push on the enter button now, it will total all of those cells up. And you can see the cells that have been selected and they're all color coded. That's one method. Another method that we can use is where we would add a range of cells together. A range is basically a bunch of cells, and a great example of how we do this is with the sum function. A function or a formula, often used interchangeably, although words are used the same, but a function basically has some stuff in a bracket, and a function is a predetermined set of instructions that the program knows what to deal with. So over here, when we did our addition, those weren't a function because it was simply just using the plus symbol or plus operator to add numbers. With a sum function, we're going to select and left click and drag down, and then we're going to close off our end bracket, and we're now saying that the cells C3 to C9 within our range, we'd like to add them together by doing a sum function. And when I add those now, we've got this one other model occurring. The last model that we can use to try and add things together is we use some of the auto sum functions, and there's a couple of handy ones that we've got over here. So I'm going to show you all the different methods that we can use. So we've got sum, average, count, max, min, and there's a whole bunch of others that we can use. But you can see it's just a quick button, and we press on that, it's going to work out and think, actually there's some cells above us, do you want me to add those together? Are these the ones that we're dealing with? If we're not happy with the range that's selected, I can come to the top corner and then I can reselect my range if I want, or I can drag those up, and then when I'm happy with the range that I've selected, I can push the enter button. And then I'm going to do the last method over here, and I'm going to do an equals sum function once more and select those and fill those across. Now I've used a couple of different methods for filling those out, but in actual fact I'm going to delete the contents of my cells, and I'm going to do that by pushing the delete key rather than the backspace key. If I push the backspace key once I've got my cell selected, it will only delete the first instance of the range. So what I'm going to do instead is highlight and push the del key or delete key to get rid of my range. What I'm going to do here is actually change this to probably the most efficient formula possible, which is the sum formula. Highlight those, and now that I've got this formula, I can use a really handy feature of a spreadsheet program called the fill handle. And you'll notice that when I've got my mouse clicking in each of the cells, it's got a big plus symbol going on. When I come to the bottom right hand corner, that changes to a small plus symbol. That means I'm basically going to be filling across that formula across my cells. You can see how it's selected now and showing that it's going to go across all of those particular cells. I'm going to release the mouse now, and those formulas are smart enough to know that when I move or drag that formula across here, I'm no longer dealing with the B3 to B9 range, I'm now dealing with the C3 to C9 range. So it's a pretty smart formula, and it's basically dragging things across using things called relative cell addresses. Okay, so that's the first formula that we want to do. The next formula that we've got here is working out the maximum number within our range. Now we can visually go through and say, well, the maximum number should be 78 within our range. Let's just double check to make sure that's true. Okay, and as you'd expect, we've got this number coming up here. Now same thing, I can look at dragging those across. Okay, and the opposite of the maximum formula is the minimum formula, and equals min, and this will find the lowest number within our range. An average formula, really handy. It's going to first of all add all the numbers together and then divide it by the number of entries within our range. So we could do that with the equals sum formula and then say equals sum divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But this average formula is smart enough to know to do that by itself. So equals average, then the range, and it will calculate this average for us. If you know anything about averages, we probably know that it's got a few other decimal points in there which we could look at adding. In this case, it's exactly 38, so if we want to get rid of those, we probably can. The median, to give you a little bit of a rundown, the median is often used interchangeably with the average, but they are different. What a median does is we'll rank those in ascending order or descending order. So the highest is at the top, lowest is down the bottom, and then it picks the middle number. So if I was to select this median, you can see the median is actually different from the average. Sometimes when we have a range of numbers, we want to work out how many numbers within this range, and we can work that out manually by clicking on the cells and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But again, if we've got a massive number within our range of cells, this formula can be really helpful, called the equals count formula, to return how many cells within a given range. Now this will only work out the number of entries. So for instance, if I've got a blank here, that doesn't take that into account. If I have a letter here, it doesn't take that into account. It only takes into account the fact that we have a number in there. Now you'll notice that when I change these answers here up the top, all of my formulas, because I've used cell references rather than actual hard-coded numbers within my formulas, it's simply picking these up and updating these formulas automatically. And this is the beauty of a spreadsheet as opposed to using, say, bookworks and calculators to do things. So the power of that means that a simple change here gets automatically updated and reflected through the running of our other formulas. Now you can see I've got a whole other bunch of formulas that I'd like to update. I've already shown you how we can use the fill handle to do one cell at a time, but what we're going to do here is take all of those formulas, which are quite different, select the fill handle, drag those formulas across, and all of those formulas will come across nicely. Okay, so we're up to now working with percentages. Percentages can be a little bit confusing for students, and this is where we're going to introduce a concept called fixed cell or absolute cell addresses. So to do a percentage, we need to know what is our mark here out of 60. So we need to have really a number of 60 somewhere within our document, so that we don't basically plug in this number divided by 60, because as I've mentioned in the past, if our test was to suddenly change out of a different number, this answer would now be incorrect. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically come down here and say that my mark is out of 60. I could plug it somewhere over here, and I'm going to simply say that my mark is out of 60. Okay, so I want to know what is 45 as a percentage of 60. So to do that, I'm going to click the equals button, and we're going to do division. So the division symbol or divided by symbol is the /. There is no division symbol nicely laid out like you're used to, like on your calculator or in math textbooks. So it's the /. And then we simply come up here and say that it's the mark out of 60. There's no need to do any multiplying by 100. We can use the program to do this for us. And we're going to click on enter. Now 0.75 of course is the same as 75%. So we can now decide to come in here and format our cells and say that we want our cells to be showing as a percentage with a certain level of precision. Click on OK. Or we can come up here and we can select the different options for selecting percentage style. Okay, and again we could add or remove the number of decimal points that we want. Now, of course I showed you before how we could use the fill handle. What we're wanting to do now is to left click and drag those down, but there will be a problem. And the problem is because we're referring to this cell over here, and every time we move down one here, it is also moving this cell down one. So for instance, we're wanting E4 to be divided by this cell, but in actual fact, because it's dropped down one, it's thinking I need to drop down here. So we need a way around that. You'll notice that we've got these little green arrows or triangles at the corner of my cell, and we've got this little exclamation point popping up. So it's saying there's a problem, and it's trying to give you some help with that. I'm going to help you for this, and across the top here we're going to fix this cell so these ones will move when we fill our formula down, but this one will remain fixed. And the way we do this is either by pushing the F4 key on our keyboard. We can cycle through these different options, or we can come up the top here and manually plug these in. And what we're after are these dollar symbols. The dollar symbols fix the column and it fixes the row to be a specific cell. So if I want to be able to fill my formula across or down, and I only want it to refer back to column I, but the row can change, I can use this option. In this case, what I want to be able to do is fix both the row and the column so that this cell will never move. Okay, and now when I refill that formula down, because I've set the initial formatting to show us percentage, fill this down, percentages are now coming through. So you can see here we've got an impossible score. We've got 67 out of 60, so that's not quite right. We've got a 60. We've realised that we've made a bit of a mistake. The test is actually going to be out of 90. So over here we simply update our answer, 90, and you can see now everything gets nicely updated. We could decide to look at filling our formulas across here to work out what our highest and lowest marks are, and average and median marks. So we've got a bit of an understanding of what's going on, and again I could format those to show things a little bit easier coming through. Okay, so that's going to be showing you the highest score, the lowest score, and the median mark, and also let's do the average also. So this is basically showing you how we can do a bunch of different things. We've used some formatting, we've applied formulas, we've filled those formulas across. These are the most common formulas that we'll probably work with. There are a few others that we'll need to look at adding. So this is basically showing you how we can do a bunch of different things. We've used some formatting, we've applied formulas, we've filled those formulas across. These are the most common formulas that we'll probably work with. There are a few others that we'll need to look at adding. The fill handle can also be used for some other very useful things. We can do things like fill a range of numbers down. We can fill days of the week. We can fill months of the year down. And let me show you how we can do this. We can use the fill handle, left click and drag it down, and you can see that the months of the year are being filled down. Do the same thing with days of the week. With numbers, when we fill that down, you'll notice that it's copying them all down. We can either select this option at the bottom and decide to fill a series. If I undo those and refill, and while I'm filling, if I push the control key on my keyboard and release, those numbers are also coming down quite nicely. Okay, so other formulas that we're quite wanting to look at getting used to. We've used the divided symbol already to try and work out our examination percentages, but we might like to do other things as well, such as maybe some multiplication. So multiplication, if we just I don't know, say multiply these cells, let's click on a cell reference, and the multiplication symbol is the little asterisk character, and then say let's multiply that cell by that cell. Okay, so that's multiplication, and of course we could do some basic subtraction as well if we wanted to by using the minus symbol. So those are the main formulas that we're going to need. The final formula that we're wanting to try and teach you will be the equals if formula. And if formula uses a logical test to return something that is either true or false. An example of this would be if you are 16 years of age, you can be eligible for your license. If you're not 16 years of age, the value that is returned if it's not true would be not eligible for your license. So we can either decide to return a string, which is some writing, or we can return a calculation or some numbers in either of these two options. So let's now show you whether a student has done well or not within an exam. So let's put this let's put a label. Okay, And let's make this label stand out a little bit by applying some basic formatting. If I'd like to try and apply the same formatting as I've got up here, which has got the text wrapping and some shading, I'm going to come up here and click the Format Painter tool, and that's a very handy tool for making it all look the same as what we've got across the top. And of course I'd probably want to do some additional formatting up here to turn on all my borders so things look the same. So what we're wanting to say here is whether the student did good or not in their exam. In actual fact we'd probably do it more over here, so for each student we could work things out. So let's maybe give ourselves a little bit more room. I'm going to insert some cells or some columns here. I want all of the stuff here to move away. So I can either right click on my column, insert some additional additional columns to move things out the way, or I can highlight my cell, and then in the corner you'll notice when I come to the borders it changes to like a little compass type symbol, and I'm going to left click and drag those across so that I've got a little bit more room now. I'm going to take this cell, and by dragging this and moving this is the same as doing a cut and paste. And again, I'd probably want to look at resizing the heights and widths of my columns, okay, to make things fit nicely. So let's give it a bit of a criteria that if the student has done or gotten a score better than 50%, they have done good in the exam. If they've gotten less than 50%, they have done bad in the exam. So the words that we want to return here will either be good or bad. So the way we're going to do this is by saying an equals if symbol, which is our logical test. So if this cell is greater than, so that's the greater than symbol, and actual fact we can decide to do it either way depending on how we want to structure our logic, but if it's greater than or equal to, so that way if they get 50% they're going to get returned with a criteria of good. Okay, so 50 and 50.1 is all considered good. Okay, so if it is greater than 50, okay, and then we've pretty much finished our logical test now. So if that condition is true, we want to have something returned. Now because we're going to return a string or a bunch of letters, we place that within quotation marks. So I'm going to say here, we've done good. Okay, so that is the value that will be returned as true if this condition is met. I'm going to push the comma symbol, and you can see the little tooltip comes up saying we're now moved on to the value of false. So if we haven't gotten more than 50%, it's going to say that we've done bad. And then we're going to close out of our formula, making sure that I've used these in the right way. So at the moment I haven't quite got enough quotation marks around things, so it will return as an error. In this case, we've now filled in all the different parameters that we need. Click on enter, and you can see it's now returning bad. I can fill those formulas down, and we can work out whether students have done good or bad within our test. So something's not quite right here. What's actually happening is it's saying 50. Now, of course, this is not 50, this is 50%, and there's a difference. We are dealing, if we're wanting to deal with 50%, let's try and see if we can put a percentage symbol in. 50%, of course, should be 0.5 or with the percentage symbol after it. If I was to change those back and just undo my changes, and if I'm wanting to put this in as a decimal number, okay, 0.50 is the same as 50%. So either of those methods would be fine. I quite like doing 50% because it keeps things clear in my head. I'm going to fill this in now, and I'm going to fill those formulas down. And it's always a good really important that you do some visual checks. So at the moment I'm expecting this to be good, so above 60. This person could be considered bad because we've gotten under 50. Here's another one that's bad, and everything else is considered good. Okay, so that's one thing we could do with a logical test with an if formula. Another thing that we could do is we could do a calculation. So if the person has gotten say less than 25% in a mark, maybe we could do some kind of scaling or something to our test. So if this cell is, if this is out of 100, if it's less than say 60% or 60, yeah, if it's less than 60, because we haven't said that these are percentages, so this is just a a normal decimal number. Okay, so if the number is less than 60, let's go through and multiply this cell, and let's increase it by an amount. Let's just increase it by, say, 10%. And I'll talk more about this in the future. So increasing it by 1.10 will mean that there's your 10%. If we multiplied it by 0.10, it would mean it would return what 10% is of our total. So it would return 2.5. By putting the 1 in front of it, it will add the 0.25, 2.5 onto our 25. That's what's going to happen if it's true. If it's not true, let's just simply return what's happening in our cell. Okay, so 25 plus our 2.5 ends up with 27.5, and then I could fill that down. So probably not the best example of why we'd actually use the if formula to do some kind of calculation in there, but just trying to keep a nice exercise with our English test scores. So that's basically most of the formulas that you'll need to try and work with and deal with, and we'll do some practice exercises in class to try and help you. Alright, now some of the other things that we might like to do with our cells or information that we've got is we might want to look at sorting our information so that the highest exam person is at the top of the list and the lowest is at the bottom. And now you've done a bit of work with this already with word processing probably, so to run through this relatively quickly, we can highlight all the cells that we want to be affected by this change. We're wanting to leave these as they are, we don't want those jumbled up in our mix. And then on the Home tab, or there's actually a few different places that we can do a sort, we can select the sort and filter option, and we can decide to sort it A to Z, but we need to actually provide a little bit more information so it knows which cells to sort it by. So by bringing up the custom sort dialog box, we can decide to sort by one of our columns, and we need to say whether it's got headers or not. Now, if we've said that the data's got headers, which it does, I had selected this cell, this row initially, and that means that this will not be jumbled up in our cells being mixed around. If I say that it doesn't have headers, these common test ones will also be jumbled up as well, so I don't really want to do that. What I do want to have happen, however, is to have Jim and Sally and Tony all be moved around depending on their percentage score in the exam. So we're going to say which column we'd like to sort by first off, and you can see that those headings across these grey cells are coming up here. So we're after the %, and we can decide to sort on different things, values or cell color. And if this was text, we could be sorting on the text so that we could sort the names alphabetically if we'd like. But in this case we are sorting by values, and we can either sort in a descending or ascending order. Descending is going from largest to smallest, ascending is going from smallest to largest. So in this case, let's put largest to smallest, so we have the top exam score in this first row, and everything else filtering down from there. I can also have additional levels, so if I've got two people on the same score, which we don't quite have here, I can decide to sort on another criteria. So it could be sort by percentage score and then sort by the person's name perhaps. But in this case it's simply going to rank them in descending order, and it's also moved these things here around. If I was to show you a different way of doing that, if I was just to select these cells here and simply say sort and filter and sort largest to smallest, it's going to pop up with a little option saying, are you sure you want to continue, or do you want to expand the current selection, because it's working out that there's a whole other bunch of information around it that you haven't included. Now if I continue with the current selection, these will all be jumbled up, these will stay the same, which means that these will no longer be accurate anymore. If I decide to expand the selection, because I've got a whole bunch of other numbers, it may actually alter things around quite a lot. So you need to really work out what's the best method depending on how much information you've got, and the best method in this situation is to highlight the cells you'd like and then use the sort option from here. So now that we've got our rank scores, we might like to look at graphing or charting this information. Now we can easily highlight and the cells that we'd like to graph together, and we can elect to insert a graph. Now there's a whole bunch of pre-made graphs or charts that we could look in using. Some of them are pretty weird and I've never actually used or seen too much of in a math situation, but you may have a better understanding of when these might be appropriate to use. So the main ones that we tend to use will be the line, column, pie and scatter charts and bar charts. Obviously a pie chart shows relationships between percentages very nicely, and column and scatter charts show the correlation between two or more bits of data. So let's go and insert maybe a column chart. Now these cells are nicely next to each other. If we're wanting to maybe do some more meaningful information, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place maybe a label across the top there, so my chart will have a nice axis. So I might place up the top here student names and then select those cells. I'm wanting to include the examination percentage. Now because these cells aren't next to each other, I don't want to select all of those cells because it will also graph these other columns of information. So I'm going to left click and push the control key while I select this far column of information. So this is selecting cells that are not next to or not adjacent to each other. Okay, and then I'm going to come at the top here and say let's do a column graph. Now there are 2D and 3D and different types of ways of presenting the information that you might like to explore. I'm going to do one of these clustered cylinder ones. I think they look pretty cool. And then straight away it just inserts this directly into this main worksheet, and I'm actually wanting to take this and place this in a different position. So let's select the whole table perhaps, so that the whole chart, so we can take this somewhere else. And I'm now going to try and control exit. So I've cut it, and now I'm going to paste that onto a separate page so that I've got a bit more room to try and rework things. Now in this case the legend doesn't add too much information, so what I might like to do is under my charting options you'll notice that we've got this green option appearing, and we can change things like colors and different options in here. We can change our labels that we're wanting to apply and whether we want more or less information, and there's a whole bunch of different ways of presenting this, whether you want to have values being shown above and beyond, and you can still customize these even further. So we'll pick one that I think represents things quite nicely. Let's just go back to that first one that we had. I don't like the legend, it doesn't really add too much information, so I'm just going to push the delete key and get rid of it. And you can see that my chart resizes here. If I click on the actual chart, I can do things like resizing things or moving things around, so that we can alter what our overall dimensions are like. Sometimes it takes a bit of working to try and figure out where things are, so you can see it took me several clicks to try and reposition things. If I use this one, it's going to alter the scale of the thing, so I've got to be a little bit careful about doing that. So if I want to add additional labels and legends, I can try and do that. I can also come over here and decide to right click. I can individually colour some of my data series by saying that some things are going to be different colours and shapes and have different fills according to what I want to do. So lots of ways of customizing your particular graphs, which you should definitely look at exploring. Other things that we've got is the layouts, where we can decide to have a whole bunch of other options here in terms of whether things are on walls or charts and so on, and we can change the axes and flipping things around. If we want the names to be over the side and percentages down the bottom, rotations and so on, you can do things like formatting and applying different options. It's basically charting and sorting, which are the two last concepts I want to cover.